So I want you to imagine yourself in this dimly lit, really damp cellar somewhere in Paris, and it's the 1830s.
Just a completely miserable setting, right?
And you are surrounded by maybe a dozen other expatriates, like you're a tailor or maybe a shoemaker, and you've basically been driven out of your home country by these crushing economic shocks of early industrialization.
And, a tyrannical monarchy on top of that.
Exactly. So here you are sitting in this cellar, and you are trying to build a global political movement from absolute scratch.
Which is no small task.
No. And you aren't doing the normal stuff. You aren't registering a party and handing out flyers in some public square. You are doing this in absolute terrifying secrecy.
Because you have to.
Right, because you are being actively hunted by the secret police of multiple powerful European empires. Every letter you send could be intercepted. Every new guy who walks into that cellar could be a police spy.
It's just constant, suffocating paranoia.
It really is. And the threat isn't just external either. You are dealing with internal, highly armed factions within your own underground group that are, demanding you start a violent, bloody war tomorrow morning.
Which is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and if that isn't enough pressure, you will eventually end up facing these massive, highly publicized show trials.
Right.
Trials that are completely rigged with forged evidence, fabricated minute books, and perjured testimonies that are just bought and paid for by the state.
It honestly sounds like the plot of a 19th century espionage thriller.
I know, it has all the elements of like a John le Carré novel or something. But this was the gritty historical reality for the founders of the modern proletarian political movement. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking you back to the 19th century to trace a genuinely wild evolution.
It's a fascinating journey.
It really is. We are looking at the history and development of the Proletarian Party. Specifically, we're tracing its transformation from these scattered, secretive, almost mystical utopian sects into a mass, scientifically grounded political movement.
And our guide for this journey is a really massive stack of sources from the Marx and Engels collected works, often just called the MECW.
Right, the MECW.
Yeah. We are going to be chronicling the writings, the frantic letters, and the actual real-world tactical actions of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels from the 1830s all the way through the late 19th century.
Which is just an incredibly dense, crazy period of history.
It is. It fundamentally rewrote the mechanics of how human beings organize for power. But before we get into all the details of the spycraft and the theory, we need to pause for a crucial moment.
Yes, absolutely. Because the source material today contains politically charged content, we want to make it absolutely clear to you, the listener, that we are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content.
Right. We are just the messengers here.
Exactly. We are not taking any political sides, left-wing or right-wing. Our mission today is simply to impartially report on the factual history and the ideas contained within the original source material provided.
Right. And our specific mission today is to unpack the ideological and practical evolution of this movement. We really want to understand the underlying mechanics of it all.
How it actually worked on the ground.
Yeah. How do early, almost cult-like radical groups actually get reorganized into a functional entity which became the Communist League in 1847? We are going to look at how that initial blueprint was forced to evolve.
Because it didn't just happen in a vacuum.
No, not at all. It evolved through open revolutions, devastating defeats, and those rigged show trials you mentioned earlier. And it eventually became the foundation for the modern mass political parties we see today.
So we're basically looking at the exact agonizing process of how a movement goes from a secret room in Paris to a global phenomenon.
That's exactly it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even understand what a mass, scientifically grounded party is, we have to understand the starting point.
And the starting point is pretty wild.
It's straight out of a cloak and dagger novel. We have to go back to the 1830s and early 1840s, the era of secretive underground sects. So, set the scenes for us. What is the precursor to all of this?
Well, to grasp the beginning, you really have to look at an organization called the League of the Just.
The League of the Just.
Yeah. This group was founded in Paris in 1836. And it is vital to understand that it wasn't founded by political scientists or philosophers or seasoned politicians.
You guys are just regular people.
Exactly. It was founded by German immigrant craftsmen. We're talking about tailors, shoemakers, watchmakers, and carpenters.
Artisans. like people who literally work with their hands.
Precisely. These were highly skilled artisans who had been completely displaced. The early shocks of the Industrial Revolution were just destroying their traditional ways of making a living. Factories were replacing their small workshops.
So they were basically losing everything.
Yeah, and you combine that economic devastation with the oppressive, deeply censorious political conditions in Germany at the time, and you get a massive wave of refugees.
And a lot of them end up in Paris.
Right. These craftsmen found themselves living as expats in Paris, which was really the epicenter of radical thought in Europe at the time.
Man, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. You know, you are a displaced worker living in a foreign city. You probably barely speak the language. You are watching the entire economy industrialize and just leave you behind.
It's a terrifying position to be in.
Yeah. And you are trying to figure out how to survive and how to fight back. How on earth did they organize under those kinds of conditions?
Well, they organized in a way that perfectly reflected their vulnerability and the era they were living in. These early groups were deeply secretive and highly conspiratorial.
Which makes sense, given the police.
Right. But more than that, they were surprisingly mystical. Their theoretical foundation wasn't based on economics or sociology or really any hard analysis of how society functioned.
Wait, really? Then what was it based on?
It was based on utopian socialism and something called Weitlingism.
Weitlingism. I'm assuming that comes from a specific person.
It does. Wilhelm Weitling. He was a tailor himself, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a highly charismatic figure and a really prominent early leader of the League of the Just. His theories, which pretty much dominated the general vibe of the League, relied heavily on religious and moral appeals.
So it was more like a crusade than a political campaign.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Weitling and his followers would look at the suffering of the working class, and their argument essentially boiled down to, well, they'd say, this is morally wrong, this violates the laws of God and the natural rights of man.
So it was just a very passionate appeal to humanity's better angels.
Right. They weren't analyzing how wages were suppressed or how capital accumulated. They were just asserting that inequality was a sin. And you can see this perfectly encapsulated in the League's original motto.
What was the motto?
It was simply, all men are brothers.
All men are brothers. I mean, it sounds very noble.
It does sound noble.
But honestly, listening to you describe this like a secretive, underground group of outcasts relying on mystical, moralistic theories, sitting in dark rooms talking about utopia. It sounds like a strange mix between an esoteric cult, a secret society like the Freemasons, and, you know, a modern internet echo chamber.
Oh, that's a really good comparison.
Right, like one of those forums where everyone just violently agrees with each other but never actually does anything in the physical world.
Yeah, they were very isolated.
Which brings me to a massive question. If these guys were already on the ground organizing workers, if they already had this League of the Just set up across borders, why did Marx and Engels view these utopian sects with such deep suspicion?
That's a great point.
Because weren't they all fundamentally on the same side against the monarchies?
This raises a profoundly important question, and it is honestly the exact tension that defines the entire early part of our source material. You really have to understand how Marx and Engels viewed the historical life cycle of political movements.
What do you mean by life cycle?
Well, they didn't view these early secretive sects as evil or anything. They actually saw them as historically necessary during the infancy of the working class movement. Engels actually uses a brilliant comparison for this.
Oh, yeah. What's a comparison?
He compares the utopian sects to alchemy and the later scientific party to chemistry. Or he says it's like astrology evolving into astronomy.
Oh, I like that. So you need the wild, mystical, experimental phase to gather the raw data before you could eventually distill it into a hard science.
That is the exact mechanism. In the 1830s, the working class just wasn't socially or economically developed enough to act as a unified political class on a national scale.
The infrastructure just wasn't there yet.
Right. The factories were still too new, the workers were too dispersed, so these small, fantastic, conspiratorial sects were literally the only available vehicle to express their discontent. They served a purpose.
Okay, so if they served a purpose in the infancy stage, what was the mechanism that made them a problem later on? Like, why did they eventually become the enemy?
Because society kept evolving, but the sects refused to. They got stuck.
Exactly. As the broader movement matured, as millions of regular workers started moving into cities, forming massive trade unions, and engaging in real, tangible strikes for higher wages, these secret sects became actively reactionary.
I mean, they were holding things back.
Yes. They became a massive obstacle to actual progress. Marx and Engels heavily criticized them for relying on fantastic utopian blueprints. The sect leaders would sit in their secret underground rooms and literally invent the perfect societal structure in their heads.
Just completely detached from reality.
Totally detached.
Yeah.
They would draw up elaborate plans for how the perfect communal society should operate, completely ignoring the messy, violent, material reality of the actual class struggle happening right outside their door in the streets.
I think a good way to visualize this for the listener is to imagine trying to navigate a real, physical, bustling city like London or Paris. But instead of looking at the streets, you are using a map that you just drew in your head because you thought it looked pretty.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Like, you are insisting the road goes left because it morally should go left, while completely ignoring the literal brick wall standing right in front of you.
Yes. The utopian socialists were trying to force a real complex society to conform to their imaginary map. And because they believed their map was morally perfect, they developed a tendency the sources call abstentionist.
Abstentionist, meaning they basically abstain from reality.
Essentially, yes. They abstained from mass action. Because everyday politics is dirty and full of compromises.
Right.
Supporting a basic strike just to get workers an extra 10 cents an hour didn't fit their grand, pure, utopian vision of completely overthrowing society overnight.
Wasn't pure enough for them.
Exactly. So they refused to participate in basic labor struggles. They ended up completely isolating themselves from the actual working class they claimed to represent. They basically became a purified echo chamber, totally cut off from the material conditions of the world.
That makes perfect sense. If your goal is a flawless utopia, any incremental real-world progress just looks like a compromise of your morals. So we have this League of the Just. They mean well. They're mostly displaced craftsmen, but they have hit an evolutionary dead end. They are stuck in this conspiratorial, mystical phase.
And their isolation is becoming a huge liability.
Right, because the movement is growing around them. So how do we get from that failing model to the Communist League? What is the causal chain of events here?
The chain of events kicks into high gear because Marx and Engels decide to actively intervene. They look at the situation and realize that if this movement doesn't get out of the utopian clouds and ground itself in science and mass organization, it's just going to be crushed.
So they decide to step in.
Yeah. To fix this, in 1846, they set up something called the Brussels Communist Correspondence Committee.
The Correspondence Committee. Now, for you listening, try to imagine building a secure, encrypted social network across international borders, but you are doing it using only horse-drawn mail, all while knowing the state secret police are actively trying to read your letters.
It's mind-boggling when you think about the logistics.
It really is. So what was the actual goal of this committee?
The main goal was standardization and connectivity. It was an attempt to link up all these isolated, fragmented radical groups spread across Germany, France, and England.
Just getting them on the same page.
Right. Marx and Engels wanted to get them talking to each other, sharing real-world information about strikes and police actions, and most importantly, standardizing their theoretical ideas away from the utopian mysticism.
And did it work?
The intervention worked beautifully. By early 1847, the leaders of the League of the Just, who were now based in London, men like Karl Schapper, Joseph Moll, and Heinrich Bauer, they were looking at the reality around them.
They saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, they realized their old conspiratorial methods were completely failing to attract the growing mass of industrial workers. So they swallowed their pride, reached out to Marx and Engels, and formally asked them to help reorganize the League.
Man, that is a massive turning point. You have the old guard, these hardened underground guys coming to the new theorists and asking for a total structural revamp.
It was a huge concession.
Did Marx and Engels just say, great, sign us up?
Well, they agreed, but with a massive, non-negotiable ultimatum. They told the League leaders they would only join and reorganize the group if every single mystical conspiratorial element, and especially all personality cults surrounding the old utopian leaders, were completely eradicated from the organization's DNA.
They wanted to clean house completely.
Totally. They demanded a complete democratization of the group.
Okay, I need to stop you there, because the phrase democratizing a secret society sounds like an oxymoron to me.
It does sound a bit contradictory, yeah.
Right, like if you are operating underground, hunted by the police, how do you actually implement democracy without exposing everyone? What did that look like mechanically in 1847?
Mechanically, it meant completely rewriting the rule book. At two massive congresses held in 1847, the organization was torn down to the studs and rebuilt.
Starting from scratch.
Yes. The old dictatorial top-down structure where an unelected grandmaster just gave orders to blind followers that was totally scrapped. It was replaced with strict democratic principles. Every authority figure, every committee member had to be elected by the rank and file.
So the members actually had a voice now.
Exactly. And crucially, those leaders were instantly removable if they lost the confidence of the members. It ceased to be a conspiracy waiting in the shadows to launch a surprise coup.
It became a real organization.
Right. It became, as much as peacetime censorship allowed, a propaganda society aimed at openly educating the masses. And to signify this total violent break with their mystical past, the League of the Just was officially renamed the Communist League.
Wow. And if they're rewriting the rule book and renaming the group, I assume they had to get rid of that old motto, all men are brothers?
Oh, they threw it out completely. Marx and Engels argued that all men are brothers was actually a very dangerous slogan because it deliberately obscured the real economic conflicts.
How so?
Well, you can't just point to a factory owner who is literally working children to the bone and point to an exploited worker, call them brothers, and expect that warm feeling to magically solve the structural inequality. It's just a fantasy.
Right, it's just ignoring the elephant in the room.
Exactly. So they replaced it with a fiercely political, fiercely materialist rallying cry that actually recognized the reality of class conflict. Working men of all countries, unite.
Oh, wow. Here is where the philosophy completely flips. You can see the exact moment the entire movement shifts its epistemology from what should be in some perfect imaginary moral universe to what is actually happening right now in the real economy.
That is the core of it. That is the turning point. And this massive ideological shift required more than just a new slogan. It required a foundational text.
Something to explain all this to the public.
Yes. At the Second Congress, in late 1847, the League commissioned Marx and Engels to draft a brand new program that would explain this new philosophy to the world.
And what's cool is the sources in the MECW let us actually trace the evolution of this document step by step, right?
Yeah, it's amazing to see the drafts. Engels first took a crack at it with a draft called the Draft of a Communist Confession of Faith.
A confession of faith. Sounds a bit religious still.
It does, but it was structured as a Q&A, like question 1, what is communism? Answer, which was a very common, accessible format at the time for educating workers. He then revised and expanded that into a much more comprehensive document called The Principles of Communism.
And those drafts are the direct ancestors to the big one.
Yes. Those drafts provided the raw material that ultimately culminated in the drafting of the Manifesto of the Communist Party, which was published in early 1848. This document completely codified the transition to what they termed scientific communism.
Okay, hold up. Let's unpack that term for the listener. Scientific communism. Because when we hear the word science today, we immediately think of like beakers, microscopes, and peer-reviewed lab experiments.
Right, guys in white coats.
Exactly. What exactly did Marx and Engels mean by applying science to a political movement? What is the mechanism there?
To really understand their use of the word science, you have to look back at the epistemological shift we just discussed. It meant a fundamental change in the job description of the intellectual.
How so?
Under the old utopian system, the intellectual was basically a dreamer. Their job was to sit in a locked room, invent a flawless utopian system out of thin air, and then try to force the messy reality of human beings to fit into that perfect mold.
Drawing the imaginary map again.
Right. But scientific communism flipped that dynamic entirely on its head. Marx and Engels argued that intellectuals should just stop inventing systems.
Stop making things up.
Yes. Instead, they were supposed to act like sociologists or economists. Their job was to scientifically observe the actual historical march of the proletariat.
Look at the real data.
Exactly. To look at real-world economic data, to study the mechanisms of strikes, to analyze how capital flows and how crises happen, and basically just become the theoretical mouthpiece for a movement that was already naturally occurring.
So throw away the imaginary map, walk outside, and map the actual streets you are standing on. Observe reality, don't invent it.
Precisely. That's the science. Under this scientific model, the political party was not supposed to be a separate elite cult hovering above the workers, barking orders. The party was to be the most advanced, resolute section of the working class itself.
Part of the class, not above it.
Yes. They were the segment of the class that had studied the economics, that clearly understood the line of march, the material conditions, and the ultimate goals. But they were never to be separate from the working class as a whole. They were analyzing history to understand where society was naturally heading, rather than dreaming up a fantasy.
Okay, so let's take stock of where we are. We have this new scientifically grounded party. They have democratic structure. They have a brilliant new manifesto, hot off the presses. The ink is barely dry on the new rules of the Communist League. They have finally figured out how to organize.
They've got the perfect blueprint.
Right. And then reality just hits them like a freight train. Because the year is 1848.
Oh, yes, 1848, the spring of nations. All of this pristine theoretical blueprinting was immediately slammed into the chaotic, bloody reality of the 1848 European revolutions.
Let's set the stage for the listener, because 1848 is wild. This is a massive, continent-wide wave of revolution sweeping across Europe. It hits France, Germany, Italy, the Austrian Empire.
It's everywhere all at once.
People are literally tearing up the cobblestones to build barricades. Monarchs are fleeing their palaces in disguise. Ancient governments are collapsing overnight.
It was complete upheaval.
But I need to pause here and define our terms, because earlier you referred to these as bourgeois democratic revolutions.
Yeah.
What exactly makes a revolution bourgeois democratic? Who is fighting who in this scenario?
That is a highly critical distinction to make. In 1848, the primary conflict in places like Germany wasn't the workers trying to overthrow the factory owners to establish communism.
It wasn't a socialist revolution yet.
No, not at all.
No.
The primary conflict was the emerging middle class, the bourgeoisie, meaning the merchants, the factory owners, the liberal intellectuals. They were trying to overthrow the old absolute monarchies and the feudal aristocracy.
So it was the business class against the kings.
Exactly. The bourgeoisie wanted constitutional democracies, freedom of the press, and unified national markets so they could do business properly without a king getting in the way.
Okay, so where do the workers fit into this?
Well, the working class, the proletariat, joined them on the barricades because they also desperately wanted those democratic rights, like the right to assemble and the right to vote. So it was a temporary alliance of the middle class and the working class fighting together against the kings. That's why it's a bourgeois democratic revolution.
Got it. So the bourgeoisie wants a parliament so they can run the economy, and the workers want a parliament so they stop getting shot for organizing a union. They have a mutual enemy in the king.
That's a perfect way to summarize it.
So what happens to our perfectly organized, newly democratic, highly secretive Communist League when a real, open revolution against the monarchy actually breaks out?
The outbreak of these revolutions forced Marx and Engels to execute a massive, immediate tactical pivot. They looked at the barricades going up across Europe and immediately realized a fundamental truth. A small, secret underground league is completely, functionally useless in the middle of an open mass revolution.
Because secrecy implies isolation.
Exactly. You cannot operate a vanguard secret society when millions of regular people are openly fighting in the streets. The historical conditions had changed overnight, so functionally, Marx and Engels dissolved the secret operations of the League.
They just shut it down.
Basically, they issued strict instructions to all Communist League members throughout Germany to stop acting as a clandestine underground. Instead, they told them to walk out into the sunlight and join the legal open workers associations and democratic societies that were suddenly springing up everywhere.
Wait. I have to push back on this. This sounds completely suicidal.
It does seem that way at first glance.
Right. I mean, they just spent years fighting the utopian sects to build this secure, perfectly calibrated underground organization, and the very moment the kings start shooting people in the streets, literally a war zone, they tell their members to abandon secrecy, put their names on public rosters of democratic societies, and operate out in the open.
I know, it sounds crazy.
If the kings still have armies, why wouldn't the state just immediately arrest the leadership the moment they stepped out of the shadows?
It sounds paradoxical, I completely get that, but it is actually the ultimate proof of their new scientific approach in action. You are assuming that secrecy provides safety.
Usually it does.
But Marx and Engels understood that in a period of mass upheaval, isolation is far more dangerous than visibility. When the masses are in the streets, a secret society is cut off from the actual levers of power.
You can't influence a protest if you're hiding in a basement.
Right. The goal of the Communist League was never to maintain a secret conspiracy just for the thrill of it. The goal was to influence mass action. In a period of reactionary oppression, when nobody is protesting, secrecy is a necessary evil to survive. But in a period of open revolution, operating in secret means you are abandoning the steering wheel to the moderate liberals.
You're just taking yourself out of the game.
Exactly. Furthermore, blending into a massive, open, democratic movement of hundreds of thousands of people actually provides far more cover for radical organizers than hiding in a basement with the 10 guys where one police spy can take down the whole network.
That is fascinating. The mass movement is the camouflage. You trade the security of the shadows for the security of the crowd.
Precisely. It demonstrated the immense tactical flexibility of their new doctrine. The theory survived because it adapted to the objective material conditions on the ground. To really drive this mass action, Marx and Engels relocated to Cologne, Germany in 1848, and instead of running a secret club, they founded a daily newspaper.
Oh, a newspaper.
Yes, the Neue Rheinische Zeitung.
So they trade the secret handshake and the midnight meetings for a printing press and a daily circulation. What was the editorial line of this paper? Like, how did they use it?
It was a highly militant, incredibly aggressive newspaper. It became their primary instrument for guiding the broader movement. They used it to educate the masses, to analyze the shifting battle lines across Europe, and to rally all the revolutionary forces.
What were they actually telling people to do?
Through the newspaper, they focused entirely on open, practical, immediate goals. First, they argued for arming the people to defend the newly won democratic rights against the inevitable counterattack from the monarchies.
Because the kings are going to come back.
Always. Second, they relentlessly pushed the moderate bourgeois Democrats to be more radical. They were constantly calling out the liberals whenever they tried to compromise with the kings. And third, and perhaps most importantly, they used the paper to try and prevent the working class from launching premature, isolated uprising.
Okay, another point of confusion here for me. You are publishing a militant revolutionary newspaper. Why are you trying to prevent the workers from uprising? Shouldn't a revolutionary want the workers to rebel at every possible opportunity?
Because they were analyzing the balance of power scientifically, not emotionally, they knew the mechanics of warfare. If the workers launched small, uncoordinated uprisings in isolated cities to demand full socialism before the broader democratic revolution had fully defeated the monarchy and secured basic rights, two things would happen.
What's the first?
First, the liberal bourgeoisie would instantly turn against the workers out of fear for their property.
Oh, right. The alliance would break.
Exactly. And second, the workers would be left completely alone, and the king's professional military would simply march in and slaughter them.
So it's about sequencing. You can't skip steps. If you try to jump to the final stage of the revolution too early, you just get your entire base wiped out by cannons.
Yes, it's the difference between an emotional riot and a calculated revolution.
They were trying to coordinate a massive systemic change based on the real balance of class forces, not just throw brave bodies at artillery fire.
Exactly.
But sadly, despite this tactical brilliance, despite the newspaper and the mass organizing, the revolutions of 1848 and 1849 ultimately fail, right?
Yeah, they do.
The monarchies, the aristocratic generals, the reactionary forces, they eventually catch their breath. They regroup their armies, they exploit those divisions between the middle class and the workers, and they strike back with ruthless efficiency. The revolutions are crushed across Europe.
It was a devastating blow.
Which brings us to the 1850s. And the transition here has to be absolutely brutal. We go from the euphoria of open mass revolution, where anything seemed possible, right back to absolute crushing defeat.
It is an incredibly dark, deeply demoralizing time. Because the counter-revolution was victorious, the political space just slammed shut. By 1850, Marx and Engels, along with thousands of other revolutionaries, are refugees.
Back on the run.
Yeah. They are living in exile, mostly in London, dealing with extreme poverty, heavy police surveillance, and the psychological toll of having lost the fight. They are desperately trying to reorganize the scattered, defeated proletarian forces and rebuild the central authority of the Communist League in London just to keep the network alive.
And as I imagine happens in almost every defeated political movement throughout history, when the external enemy wins, the internal factions start turning their guns on each other.
Intensely.
Yeah.
The psychological pressure cooker of exile basically blew the movement apart. A massive ideological civil war erupted within the remnants of the Communist League.
Who were the factions?
Well, on one side, you have the scientific, analytical approach of Marx and Engels. On the other side, you have a highly vocal, aggressive group known as the Willett-Schapper faction.
Named after August Willich and Karl Schapper, right? Two guys who had actually been in the trenches. What was the core of their disagreement?
It fundamentally came down to how to process and respond to the defeat. The Willett-Schapper faction essentially wanted to ignore the fact that the material conditions had changed.
They just wanted to keep fighting.
Exactly. They wanted to force an immediate premature revolution by seizing power through adventurous conspiratorial acts. They wanted to raise a small, secret army of exiles, sneak back into Germany, and just start shooting, believing that their sheer willpower and heroism would magically ignite the masses into a new revolution.
Just sheer force of will.
Yeah, they completely refused to accept the reality that the revolutionary tide had ebbed and that the economy had stabilized.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Mhm.
Put yourself in the shoes of a refugee in London in 1850. You've lost your home, your friends are dead or in prison, you've dedicated your entire life to this cause. Shouldn't you want a revolution right now?
It's completely understandable on an emotional level.
Doesn't the Willis-Schapper faction sound like the real brave revolutionaries, while Marx and Engels sound like they're just giving up and making excuses?
Right.
Why are the authors of the Communist Manifesto fighting against the guys who actually want to take up arms?
That is exactly why Willich and Schapper had a lot of support. It sounds very brave. But this clash represents a crucial lesson in Marx and Engels' political evolution, their analysis of what they called adventurism.
Adventurism.
Yes. To understand why Marx fought them so hard, we have to look at the mechanism of historical materialism. Marx and Engels understood that revolutions are not created by the sheer willpower, the moral righteousness, or the bravery of a few individuals.
They aren't just willed into existence.
Right. Revolutions are driven by deep, systemic, material conditions. Specifically, they are triggered by massive economic crises.
Walk me through that mechanism. How exactly does an economic crisis translate into a revolution?
Well, think about a massive credit crunch or a catastrophic crop failure. Suddenly, factories close, millions of people are thrown out of work simultaneously, they can't feed their families.
Pure desperation.
Exactly. This mass desperation breaks down the state's ability to maintain order. The people don't go into the streets because they read a pamphlet and were inspired by utopian ideals. They go into the streets because their material survival demands it.
So the economy has to break first.
Yes. And in 1850, Marx spent months in the British Museum analyzing global trade data, and he realized that the European economy was entering a massive period of prosperity and expansion.
The opposite of a crisis.
Right. The crisis was over, the state treasuries were full, the armies were paid, and employment was up.
So you literally cannot force a revolution during an economic boom. The fuel just isn't there.
Exactly. Marx argued that the Willich-Schapper faction was substituting objective reality with their own subjective emotional fantasy, trying to force an armed uprising during a period when the reactionary governments were economically stable and militarily at their peak wouldn't just fail, it would lead to the total, permanent destruction of the entire movement.
Because the state would just crush them.
And worse. If Willich and Schapper went back to Germany and started a small riot, the Prussian state wouldn't just kill them. They would use the riot as the perfect excuse to round up, imprison, or execute every single progressive thinker, union organizer, and democratic sympathizer left in Europe.
It's suicide masked as bravery. And worse, it's taking the rest of the movement down with you.
Perfectly said. The minutes of the Communist League meetings from this time are incredible to read. Marx famously stood up and told the Willich-Schapper faction that there was a fundamental difference in how they spoke to the workers.
What did he say?
Marx said, "We tell the workers they might have to go through 15, 20, or 50 years of civil wars and grueling political struggles, not just to change society, but to change themselves and become fit for political rule." But the Willich-Schapper faction was telling the workers they had to come to power immediately, tomorrow, or they might as well all just go to sleep.
Wow, that's a stark contrast.
It is. This epistemological clash between science and adventurism was totally irreconcilable. It led to a bitter, permanent split in the Communist League in September 1850.
So the movement tears itself in half, the scientific wing versus the adventurist wing. But here's the tragic irony. Marx's warning that the adventurists were going to give the police the perfect excuse to destroy the entire movement turns out to be terrifyingly prophetic.
Unfortunately, yes.
Because while Marx and Engels are fighting sectarianism internally in London, the Prussian state launches an all-out coordinated assault externally in Germany. And this leads us to what is essentially a 19th century true crime story.
Oh, it completely is.
It's a massive legal procedural. The Cologne communist trial of 1851 to 1852.
It really is a true crime story, complete with international espionage, state-sponsored document forgery, and a massive government cover-up. Because the Prussian government did exactly what Marx feared. They used the clumsy, loud, highly public activities of the adventurist factions, the Willich-Schapper group's constant public talk of immediate uprisings, as a pretext to launch a dragnet.
But they didn't just target the adventurous, did they?
No, of course not. They used the pretext to clamp down on the real, scientifically grounded analytical communists who had quietly remained in Germany to do the slow work of organizing.
How does the dragnet actually start? What's the inciting incident for the trial?
It begins in May 1851. The Prussian police arrest a man named Peter Nothjung, who was acting as an emissary for the League, at a train station in Leipzig. He had some organizational documents on him.
Just a lucky catch by the police.
Basically. But this single arrest led to a massive coordinated cascade of raids, resulting in the arrest of several prominent Communist League members in the city of Cologne. And here is the truly horrifying part of the state's methodology. The Prussian government kept these men in solitary confinement for a year and a half.
Oh, wow. 18 months.
18 months in a dark cell. No trial, no bail, and fundamentally no real evidence that they had committed any actual crime against the state.
18 months in solitary confinement, just waiting for the police to find or invent something to charge you with. That is psychological torture.
It was explicitly designed to break them. The trial finally began in October 1852 in Cologne. The prosecution was spearheaded by the Prussian police apparatus, specifically driven by a notorious, deeply corrupt police chief named Wilhelm Stieber.
Wilhelm Stieber. What was his angle?
Well, Stieber's goal in this trial wasn't to prove that these specific men broke a specific law. His goal was purely political. He needed to fabricate a massive, terrifying, treasonable conspiracy to justify the existence and the massive budget of the Prussian police state to the general public.
He needed a boogeyman to keep his job.
Exactly. He needed to scare the public.
But if they held these guys for 18 months and still didn't have any actual evidence of treason, how did Stieber run a trial? What did he actually present to the jury?
He presented a masterclass in state fabrication. The police literally forged the primary evidence. They presented something called the original minute book of the Communist League's Central Authority meetings. According to this fake book, the defendants were plotting immediate, violent insurrection.
They just made up a fake ledger.
Yeah. And to create this fake ledger and corroborate it, Stieber utilized a vast network of spies and agents provocateurs, shady men with names like Wilhelm Hirsch, Charles Grief, and Fleury, who were operating in London and Paris.
What were these spies doing?
They stole personal documents, they professionally altered the handwriting on intercepted letters to make them look like they were written by Karl Marx giving violent orders, and they were openly paid by the state to commit perjury in open court.
That is just wild to wrap my head around.
That's crazy, right? The entire strategy was to desperately blur the lines. They took the violent, bomb-throwing, delusional plots of the Willits-Schapper adventurist factions and legally linked them to the quiet, scientific, analytical communists sitting in the docks in Cologne.
That is insane. A modern European state completely fabricating a ledger of crimes to execute its political opponents. Now, I'm trying to picture the logistics of the defense here. The defendants are locked in a cage in Cologne. Marx and Engels are sitting hundreds of miles away in London, watching their friends go on trial for their lives based on fake evidence. What can they possibly do?
They went into absolute overdrive. The sources in the MECW paint an incredible picture of the frantic, behind-the-scenes spycraft they had to engage in. They basically turned Marx's cramped, impoverished apartment in London into a literal intelligence clearinghouse.
Like a war room.
Exactly. There is a letter in the archives from Jenny Marx, Karl's wife, written to a comrade named Adolf Kluss in late October 1852, right in the middle of the trial, that details exactly how this operation worked.
What does she describe? What was it like?
She describes a scene of total exhaustion and absolute dedication. She writes about how the Marx Party worked day and night. They had 2 or 3 people constantly writing at desks, others running errands across London, scraping pennies together just to buy stamps and food.
What were they writing?
Well, because the Prussian police were presenting forged handwriting and fake timelines in Cologne, Marx had to counteract it with real evidence. He had to run around London getting sworn, notarized affidavits from publicans, landlords, and merchants to prove exactly where certain people were on certain dates.
To prove the police timeline was physically impossible, an alibi defense.
Right. But gathering the proof in London was only half the battle. Jenny Marx writes about the nightmare of transmission. They had to copy every single one of these lengthy legal affidavits 6 to 8 times by hand.
Wait, what copied them 8 times?
Because the post office was completely compromised, the British and Prussian intelligence services were opening their mail. If they just sent one copy to the defense lawyer in Cologne, the police would intercept it and destroy it.
So they needed backups.
A lot of backup. So they had to smuggle these documents into Germany using multiple convoluted routes. They would send one copy hidden in commercial shipments through Frankfurt, another routed through Paris, another carried by a sympathetic merchant, just praying that one of the 8 copies would slip past the police dragnets and actually reach the defense lawyers in the courtroom. And they were doing all of this while Marx's own house in London was being openly watched by Prussian spies from morning to night. It was an incredibly intense, dangerous, high-stakes information war just to expose the police forgeries.
This is incredible. It is a literal battle of information asymmetry. A few impoverished exiles in a London apartment taking on the entire intelligence apparatus, the postal system, and the courts of the Prussian state. And did it work? Did the affidavits get through? Did they expose the forgeries in court?
Miraculously, yes, they did. Thanks to the documents smuggled in by Marx's network, the defense lawyers were able to dramatically and definitively prove in open court that the so-called original minute book was a clumsy police forgery.
So they caught them red-handed.
Yes, they proved that the handwriting was faked, and they exposed the chief witness, Police Chief Stieber, as a perjurer right in front of the jury. They systematically dismantled the entire foundation of the prosecution's case.
So they won. They proved it was a frame-up.
Well, they won the argument, but they lost the verdict.
But what?
Despite the fact that the state's case was proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, to be a complete fabrication, the bourgeois jury still convicted 7 of the 11 defendants.
How is that legally possible if the evidence is fake?
Because it wasn't a trial about facts, it was a trial about class terror. The jury was made up of middle-class merchants and aristocrats. They were so utterly terrified of the communist threat, so afraid of a repeat of the 1848 revolutions, that they simply didn't care if the evidence was fake.
They just wanted someone to punish.
Right. They wanted these men locked away. The 7 convicted men were sentenced to years of hard labor in fortress prisons.
Wow. You can expose the machinery of the state, you can prove they are lying, but if the jury is scared enough of your ideas, the facts literally do not matter.
That was the harsh reality.
But knowing Marx, he didn't just accept his defeat and stay quiet, did he?
Not at all. Immediately after the trial concluded, Marx took all the evidence they had gathered and wrote a blistering, devastating pamphlet called Revelations Concerning the Communist Trial in Cologne.
Oh, to set the record straight.
Exactly. This document served a vital dual purpose. First, it was a defense of his friend's honor after the fact. But more importantly, it was a massive, highly documented exposure of the Prussian police bureaucratic state and the cowardly bourgeois jury system.
Naming names.
Oh, absolutely. He laid out step by step exactly how the espionage network operated, how the agents provocateurs were paid, and how the perjury was coordinated. He wanted to permanently brand the Prussian government with this infamy in the eyes of history.
So we have to look at the fallout here. What does this all mean for the movement? You have the internal split where half the members walk away with the adventurists, and now you have this massive external blow from the state where your best organizers in Germany are locked in fortress prisons.
It meant the definitive end of an era. The arrests, the paranoia, and the trial effectively destroyed the organizational network in Germany. Marx and Engels looked at the wreckage and realized that the model of a secret, relatively narrow vanguard organization had completely exhausted its historical possibilities.
It just couldn't survive anymore.
The state was too powerful, the intelligence agencies were too sophisticated. So on November 17th, 1852, just a few days after the trial ended, on a motion proposed by Marx himself, the Communist League was officially dissolved.
Dissolved. The League is dead.
It's over.
But obviously the story doesn't end there. The Proletarian Party is not dead because we have the entire 20th century ahead of us. Because the Cologne trial successfully decapitated the secret leadership in Germany, the movement was forced to fundamentally adapt to survive.
It was forced to evolve again.
Exactly. So let's move into the final phase of our deep dive. Let's look at the long game. How do the brutal lessons learned from the secretive League of the Just, the democratic experiments of the Communist League, and the state-sponsored terror of the Cologne trial pave the way for a modern, international mass political parties? We are moving out of the grim 1850s and into the 1860s through the 1880s.
Well, the dissolution of the Communist League wasn't a surrender. It was a cold, scientific recognition of reality. The material conditions were not right for an organization.
So they just wait.
So Marx and Engels pivoted. They spent the remainder of the 1850s doing 2 things. Preserving the revolutionary cadres, meaning keeping the smart, dedicated organizers safe, educated, and connected, and propagating their scientific theory through mass journalism.
Journalism again.
Yes, Marx didn't retreat into obscurity. He actually became the lead European correspondent for the New York Daily Tribune, which was one of the largest newspapers in the world at the time.
Wait, really? A mainstream American paper?
Yeah. He wrote hundreds of articles analyzing global economics, the Crimean War, British colonialism in India, and international politics. He was educating a vast global public audience, applying scientific communism to current events.
That is a massive shift in tactics. They went from writing encrypted manifestos for a few hundred guys in an underground cellar to writing economic analysis for one of the biggest capitalist newspapers in America.
It's quite the jump.
They're using the massive reach of the bourgeois press to keep the theoretical flame alive.
Exactly. They were biding their time, waiting for the material conditions to ripen again. And they were right. In the 1860s, a new global economic crisis triggered a massive upsurge in the working class movement across Europe. Trade unions grew exponentially.
So the engine starts running again.
Yes. This resurgence provided the material base for the creation of the first international, officially known as the International Working Men's Association, founded in London in 1864.
Okay, so how is the first international functionally different from the old Communist League?
It was entirely different in scale and composition. The Communist League was a relatively small, tight-knit, ideologically unified vanguard organization. The First International was a massive, sprawling, broad-based coalition.
Much bigger tent.
Exactly. It included British trade unionists, French anarchists, followers of Proudhon, and various other socialist groups. Marx and Engels used the immense theoretical clarity they had painstakingly honed during the Communist League days to draft the rules and guiding documents for this new massive organization.
So they're kind of steering the ship.
Right. Their strategy was to gently, patiently steer this giant coalition towards scientific socialism without alienating the different, less theoretically advanced factions. They were finally operating on a mass scale.
And the ultimate bloody test for this new era of mass politics comes in 1871, right? The Paris Commune.
Yes, the Paris Commune is one of the most important events in 19th century history. In 1871, following the disastrous Franco-Prussian War, the regular French army retreated, and the working-class citizens of Paris rose up. They literally took control of the capital city and established their own government, the Paris Commune.
Which is just incredible to think about.
It is. For Marx and Engels, watching from London, this was the ultimate historical laboratory. It proved, in real time, that their theories were correct. It proved that a working-class government was practically possible.
And they actually ran things. Right?
Yes. For 2 months, the workers ran a major modern metropolis. They managed the economy, passed progressive labor laws, separated church and state, and organized city services without any aristocrats or capitalist owners telling them what to do.
But the Commune didn't survive.
No, it didn't.
It was eventually surrounded and crushed by the French army in a horrific massacre, the Bloody Week, where tens of thousands of Parisians were executed in the streets. When Marx and Engels analyzed this incredible victory and this horrific defeat, what was the primary lesson they drew? Why did the Commune fall?
The primary lesson was organizational. The Commune proved that while the working class has the sheer numbers, the instinct, and the capability to govern, they have a fatal weakness.
Which is?
Without a unified, scientifically grounded political party to organize a centralized military defense, manage the national economy, and enforce a unified, ruthless strategy against their enemies, they are fatally vulnerable to the highly organized military power of the bourgeoisie.
So they lacked focus.
Exactly. The Commune failed largely because it lacked theoretical and organizational unity. The leadership was a chaotic mix of different utopian sects, anarchists, and radical factions.
Oh, they couldn't agree on anything.
Right. This lack of a unified party led to endless internal debates, fatal hesitation, and a total failure to organize a coordinated military campaign against the French army that was gathering right outside the gates.
They had the numbers and the courage, but they didn't have the unified command structure. So the lack of a distinct, scientifically grounded party was their Achilles heel.
Exactly.
So how did the First International respond to this realization? How do you fix that flaw?
You fix it by making the party structure a non-negotiable requirement. The trauma and the lessons of the Commune led to a landmark moment. In September 1871, at the London Conference of the First International, Marx and Engels fought fiercely to push through a crucial resolution.
What did the resolution say?
This resolution stated, and this is practically a foundational text for all modern political organizing, that the working class cannot act as a class against the power of the owning classes, except by constituting itself into a distinct, independent political party, fundamentally opposed to all the old parties formed by the propertied classes.
That is a massive structural shift from that cellar in Paris in 1836.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this resolution is the culmination of their entire life's work up to that point. We can see the complete evolutionary chart.
Yeah, it all lines up.
The Communist League was the historical prototype, the small, highly pressurized laboratory where they first tested the idea of scientific organization. The First International was the bridge that connected that high-level theory to the real, breathing mass of millions of unionized workers.
So they finally connected the theory to the people.
Right. By the 1870s and 1880s, the goal was irrevocably changed. The goal was no longer to have small groups of enlightened thinkers in secret rooms debating moral utopias.
Yeah.
Nor was it to have uncoordinated, spontaneous, adventurous riots that just get people killed.
So what was the final goal?
The ultimate goal was to have millions of workers, openly organized in massive trade unions, utilizing democratic parliaments where possible, but always operating with a unified scientific understanding of their historical mission, and housed within a distinct, fiercely independent mass political party.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and just recap this incredible, grueling journey.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We started in the dark, paranoid days of the 1830s with the League of the Just. We saw these displaced, mystical underground craftsmen who honestly believed they could change the cruel reality of the Industrial Revolution with a moral slogan, "All men are brothers," using an imaginary map of a perfect world.
Which just wasn't enough.
Right. We saw Marx and Engels step into that fray during the pivotal years of 1846 and 1847. We watched them strip away the conspiracies, banish the cults of personality, and build the Democratic Communist League, shifting the entire epistemology of the movement from utopian fantasy to the scientific observation of material reality.
The birth of scientific communism.
Exactly. We saw them exhibit immense tactical flexibility, throwing those carefully crafted secret blueprints out the window the moment the 1848 barricades went up, realizing that open mass action and a militant daily newspaper provided more power and more cover than a secret handshake ever could.
It was a brilliant pivot.
Yeah. We watched them endure the psychological crush of defeat in the 1850s. We saw them fight a bitter internal civil war against the Willett-Schapper adventurists, proving that you cannot force a revolution through sheer willpower when the economic conditions aren't ripe.
You can't just invent a crisis.
Right. We traced the unbelievable true crime saga of the Cologne trial, where a few exiles in London battled the entire intelligence apparatus of the Prussian state, exposing forged ledgers and perjured police chiefs, only to watch a terrified bourgeois jury convict their friends anyway.
A heartbreaking moment.
It really was. And finally, we traced how all of these brutal, blood-soaked lessons culminated in the dawn of the mass political party, codified after the tragic fall of the Paris Commune. It is a stunning, deeply mechanical evolution of how human beings organize to challenge power.
It really is.
Now, as we wrap up, I want to pull this out of the 19th century and turn directly to you, the listener. Think about the information you consume today. Think about the political movements, the activist groups, the decentralized online communities, and the social media factions you see operating right now in your own life.
It's hard not to see the parallels, isn't it?
It really is.
We see shades of 19th century sectarianism everywhere today. We see groups completely isolated in their own algorithmic, ideological bubbles, entirely cut off from the mainstream of society. We see people hoping for overnight utopian changes or believing that simply having the right moral stance on the internet is enough to change the world, while they completely ignore the messy, boring, grueling material reality of actual physical organizing.
It's so true.
We have these massive digital echo chambers that, in function, look an awful lot like those disconnected, secret utopian rooms in Paris in 1836.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the provocative question I want to leave you with to mull over is this. If Marx and Engels were alive today, looking at our hyper-fragmented political movements and our deeply polarized internet bubbles, how would they analyze our material conditions?
That's a fascinating thought experiment.
How would they advise you to bridge the immense gap between having a radical, morally pure idea online and actually doing the grueling scientific compromising work of building a physical mass movement in the real world. Are our modern decentralized digital movements actually a step forward, or are we just repeating the fatal mistakes of the utopian sects?
It's a question we all need to be asking.
That is a deeply uncomfortable and fascinating question to chew on. Because as we've seen today, building a global movement from scratch is never clean. It is fraught with spies, defeats, and internal warfare. And the jump from the comfort of a secret echo chamber to the dangerous material reality of an open mass movement is always the hardest and the most important step of all.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden history and the tactical evolution of the Proletarian Party. We'll see you next time.